Let us now look at the impact of the Quran through two cases. First, the case of attitudes towards women. The Quran deals on numerous occasions with the position of women and social attitudes to them. One of its chapters or surahs is in fact named An-Nisa, or the women. A large number of Quranic verses deal with the issue of women. Distinctions on the basis of gender and class were a part of pre-Islamic and early Islamic history and society. This is reflected in the way that certain Quranic passages refer to women. However, the Quran was not entrenching gender discrimination as religious law. In fact, it was doing the opposite. In many instances, the Quran mandated improving the position of women and protecting their interests. For example, the Quran voices strong disapproval of people who did not welcome the birth of a female child. It also prohibits female infanticide, a practice common at the time in some parts of Arabia. It states explicitly that in the eyes of God, the only distinction of any consequence among human beings is in their piety and God consciousness. One verse in particular states this beyond doubt. It goes on to say, "For men and women who are devoted to God, believing men and women, obedient men and women, truthful men and women, steadfast men and women, humble men and women, charitable men and women, fasting men and women, chaste men and women who remember God often, God has prepared forgiveness and a rich reward." Women were also given the right to inherit as a result of Quranic injunction. This was a significant advancement in equity, as was the limit placed on the number of wives a man was permitted to have. Finally, clear guidelines for divorce were established, which accorded women more rights than they previously had. This feature of the Quran has inspired a number of modern Muslim feminist interpretations of the Quran. Some Quranic verses, when viewed from today's perspective, suggest that the Quran enjoins a somewhat lower status for females than for males in some cases. For instance, in certain financial matters, the value of a woman's evidence is usually considered only half that of a man's under classical Islamic law based on one particular Quranic verse. Of course, this verse can be read slightly differently. It is clear, however, that the overall effect of the Quran and the Prophet's mission was to give women in the Islamic era greater rights than they had received in the pre-Islamic Hijaz and Arabia. Now let us look at our second example, which is from the political domain, the emergence of a fledgling political state. By 632 of the Common Era, that is the year in which the Prophet died, a decade of Muslim community life in Medina had passed from 622 to 632. Many in Medina by that time had converted to Islam, and Medina became the center of the emerging Muslim political entity, or the state, inspired by the Quranic vision of a new social order, a fledgling political state. What do I mean by a fledgling political state? I do not mean a modern nation state or liberal governance as we know it today, but I do mean the notion of political organization and of political accountability. These notions and their implications at the practical level developed in complexity and sophistication within the history of Islam. The result was the development of an Islamic empire or caliphate to rival that of Rome. The initial launching of this tiny desert polity was based on the progressive ethos of the Qur'an. One way this was manifest was in the Medina document, drawn up soon after the Prophet's arrival in Medina, often now described as the first Muslim constitution. The document allowed for alliances with non-Muslims, notably local Jewish tribes. It was meant to provide guidelines for the internal governance of Medina and how all Muslims and non-Muslims and Jews should participate in this management of the affairs on an equal footing. However, its importance lies well beyond this. It represented a conscious effort to develop a political vision that recognized social and religious diversity as natural. The Constitution of Medina thus offers an indication of an early paradigm for proto-democratic governance in Islam. This fact tends to be overlooked by those today denying the potential compatibility of Islam and modern democracy. Without detailing the various arguments on this complex subject, it is possible to conclude the following. A new social order and politically functional understanding of social cohesion based on progressive notions derived from the Qur'an enabled the early Muslims in Medina to survive and prosper. In the decades that followed, this visible social cohesion led to acceptance of community as transcending old tribal barriers. Consequently, the notion of ummah emerged, ummah meaning community, invoking a unity of shared beliefs that confirmed this attempt to transcend, or at least offset, racial, ethnic, and national boundaries as the spread of Islam became significant. The early Muslim ummah, or the community, thus developed into the ideal of an Islamic caliphate. This imperial vision of powerful religio-political dynasties with associated religious authority was to last until the 20th century. This brings us to the end of this lecture.